Hi there, my name is Nessa. Today I have with me New York bestselling author who is here today to talk about her new book, Dating Makes Perfect, Pintip Dunn. Hi.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. สวัสดีค่ะ ทุกคน
Sawadee ka. So another special thing about Pintip is that she is Thai American, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Thai American. My parents are Thai and they immigrated to America. So I was grew up in the United States, but I do go to Thailand every year because most of my family lives in Thailand, in Bangkok actually, which I think Nessa, you live in Bangkok as well?
Yes, woo, we're in Bangkok. So คุณพูดไทยได้ใช่ไหมคะ
ไทยได้ค่ะ แต่ว่าก็พูดภาษาอังกฤษคล่องกว่า แต่ว่าพอพูดได้
Agreed. Agreed. So I think we should stick with English for now, and maybe we will have a few Thai questions later. We'll see.
Yes, that sounds perfect.
Okay, so can you tell me, well, you already explained a little bit about yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about your book that is about to come out, Dating Makes Perfect?
Yeah, so this is the book. There's the book cover.
Oh, looks so good.
Oh, I know. Isn't she so pretty? She looks so tight, I think.
Yes.
It comes out on August 18th, and I'm so excited about this one. So this is actually my 8th book. My other books have been thriller, science fiction, and so this is my first rom-com, my first romance. So I'm so excited about it, especially because all of my books have Thai characters, but this is the very first one that has a Thai American hero and heroine. So both leads are Thai, and you know, it's very much about her family. So most of the characters in the book are Thai. So I couldn't be more excited about it. This book is about a girl named Winnie, and she and her sisters have never been allowed to date in high school. But when her sisters get to college, her parents ask, well, why aren't you engaged yet? And they were like, oh my gosh, like we can't just flip a switch. And they rebel and they say, you know what, we're not going to get married for like 20 years or 30 years, not until we have lots of practice dating. And so her parents are like, oh wow, so our rules have backfired, so we need to reevaluate the status quo. So they said, okay, new rules. Winnie, you must date in high school in order to get the proper practice dating, but we will pick who, what, when, and where. And the first candidate for you to date is going to be the son of our longtime family friends. And it would be great because her parents love him, but unfortunately, he just happens to be her sworn enemy. So that's what the book is about. It's really fun. Enemies to lovers, fake dating, friends to lovers too, because Matt and Winnie were friends when they were kids. And just a lot about heartwarming family dynamics. I was able to write a lot about family and sisters, and so like I really loved writing the book. So much fun.
That's awesome. I finished reading it already and I love it so much. I was literally gripping my ebook, just going, oh my god. I couldn't. Oh, Matt.
Yeah.
I won't spoil too much for anyone who is possibly watching this video, but I could say it's very good and you need to go get it. That's so interesting. So what thought or spark inspired you to write this book so close to home?
Well, you know, like I said, I've written I have a lot of Thai characters in the books, but this is the one book where I've really been able to explore Thai culture. And I've been wanting to do that for a long while now. I have another book called Girl on the Verge, and that is actually a thriller, and that's also about a Thai girl. And it's also a contemporary novel about her family. But I feel part of it was that I was kind of waiting for publishing to be ready to embrace this kind of story. And I feel that over the years, with We Need Diverse Books, we've gotten closer and closer to that point. And so I'm just so happy that I was able to do this. A rom-com specifically because I really love writing in lots of different genres. I love challenging myself, and a rom-com has been something that I've really wanted to do for a long time, and I thought that would be a really great way to showcase, a lot of the family dynamics. So that's how I came about the book.
Wow, that's so nice. Did you have a particular idea or image when you were writing this book, or how did that start?
Yeah, well, how that came about was, so a lot of Thai Americans and as well as Asian Americans that I've talked to, we've kind of over the years have discussed this as a thing that happens where we're like, oh my gosh, our parents never want us to date in high school. They're always so no boyfriends, no girlfriends. And then all of a sudden you get to college and they want you to settle down. And it's just it's this switch. We've always talked about, it's not something that you can just turn on and off and, because it's all about focus on your studies. And then, as soon as they feel like you are an adult, they want you settled down. And so that it was really that idea that kind of sparked wouldn't it be funny if this attitude that they have backfires on them because they don't realize how it affects us. And so that's just how the idea came about.
I see. Which is a great idea because even for someone who is based in Thailand, actually no, I'm based in a few places, but that's another story. Even with that, I completely relate to the no dating rule, no this, no going out, and then suddenly, so you have a boyfriend.
So why aren't you engaged? Why aren't you married? And where are my grandbabies? You're like, wait a minute. Wasn't it a year ago that you were like, I wasn't supposed to even look at anybody? And all of a sudden you want grandbabies. So yeah, and it's just it's funny because since I've had the idea for the book and it's true in a lot of cultures actually, not just Thai Americans, but I feel like in other Asian American cultures, everyone's like, oh yes, that totally happens to me too. So yeah, I thought it would be a fun premise for the book.
That's really funny. Okay. Next question. There's a lot of food that is involved in this book. I was reading this and I was hungry, even if I'm in the country and I have access to these foods.
Well, I was going to say, you're lucky because you can just go and eat this food.
I must
in America, it's harder to find.
I must admit, I had some sankaya this afternoon because I was craving it. After reading those first few pages, I was like, I need to go.
Sankaya is my favorite. So for our non-Thai viewers, it's basically a pumpkin custard. It's often served with sweet sticky rice. And it's one of the things when I go to Thailand every year, I have to make sure that I get some of that. And that's my brother's favorite as well. But it's hard to find here.
Is
really
it?
hard to find. Yeah, sometimes I can find it in Thai grocery stores. Some Thai grocery stores, they'll have some pre-made foods. And so sometimes I can find it there, but otherwise that's not, I usually have to wait for my annual trip to Thailand to have that.
Thai grocery stores abroad are just a god gift just sent from heaven.
Yes, they are. And a lot of Thai restaurants in America don't make all of the more home style foods that we all crave because they're there's a certain menu that they usually have, and so usually it's the Thai grocery stores where you can find those. But back to your original question about about food and Thai culture.
Yes,
I think you would agree, right, that food is such an important part of Thai culture.
Yes, it
is. Certainly in my family, we socialize around food. We take care of each other around food. We, it's a way for us to stay connected and stay supported. And so my dad still asks me every time I talk to him on the phone, oh, have you eaten yet? And what did you eat? It's just, that's just what we do. And so it was very important for me to in this book, because it's such an important Thai culture to kind of like weave in that so much of their socializing. So I think that several of the scenes, they're sitting around eating, and you know, there's always like, well, at least in Thailand, like snacks are always being shoved at me, like ahan wang, because and that's something that I think some other cultures don't really understand. Like my husband's French, and in the French culture they don't snack. It's just not something that they really do. And so you could have like, you know, and they have late dinner, so you could have like lunch at 12 and then dinner at like 8 and then not have a snack in between. And so that was really an interesting thing for me to get used to when I met him, and you know, his family became my family, because it's like, oh wow, like in Thai culture we snack all the time. It's and like, especially when we have guests who come to our house, it's like, oh, here, eat something, have something to eat. So yeah, so sometimes I know with Own Voices books here, people are accused of like, you know, kind of name dropping food as like a shorthand for culture, and I certainly don't agree with doing that. But like in this case, it's not, to me, it's not just name dropping. It's, you know, it's a more in-depth exploration of how food and culture interact.
That's really interesting, because you're completely right on how in Thailand, or even in Thai families, just meal. I think there's a joke that in Thailand, a meal lasts from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. And that is just one meal throughout the whole day.
Right, and then it's like, breakfast at 9 and lunch is at 12. At 10:30, they're like, oh, are you hungry? Do you want to have... We even have categories of food that are meant to be snack foods. You know, you wouldn't have them at a meal. Such as, like my favorite is sapu saimu. Really hard to find sapu saimu in America.
Oh,
really
I'll send you some tomorrow.
I wish you could, but I think that is a snack, right? Like I don't think, I've never had it at a meal. Or maybe that's
it's more like a traditional finger food, but basically anything street food can be either breakfast, lunch, dinner, or snack. It's only like the hearty meals that you have with rice that would be considered the big meals. Everything else is just like an all day kind of like eat whenever you want to eat.
The other funny thing is that everything goes for breakfast. You can eat anything for breakfast. You serve it with kapom, boiled rice, and it's breakfast food. And so a lot of my American friends are like, what? You're eating like curry for breakfast? But I'm like, yeah, but it's kapom, so it's fine, right?
You can have rice with beef stir-fried with garlic, and that is breakfast. You can have rice. You can have rice with ice, khao and that is considered breakfast. So yes, we are strong foodies.
Right, and so we don't have that, you know, bright line between what is breakfast and what is everything else. And even my husband now, like, you're eating that for breakfast? And I'm like, yeah.
So I see this passion for food that you have is put into Winnie's character quite a bit.
Yes.
That's very cool.
And it's like my whole family are really passionate foodies. So there's a scene in the book where they go to Low Country, the restaurant, with Uncle Pam. That is actually a real restaurant in Chicago, owned by my brother Pam. So that's the only part of the book that's real. But yeah, so he's in the restaurant business. So definitely in our family, like food is just such an important part.
That is awesome. I will make a note to visit if I ever end up going.
Yes, you should. And it's wonderful because Low Country is like, it's Cajun boil, but in the sauces, my brother has mixed in, it's a Thai twist on the sauce. I love that. So I think you would really like it.
So there's like namjim seafood with like the green one?
He doesn't have namjim seafood, but namjim seafood we carry with us to every crab restaurant. They have crab boils. And then they bring out the crab by the dozen, and then we have our little sauce in our little bottle. And nobody has ever, they're like, oh, what's that? Oh, we should serve that. That's so good because it's so perfect with crab. But
my family does that as well. They put Tupperwares of just all chili and they bring it to any seafood restaurant that they go to.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how to eat seafood without the namjim seafood. Namjim is literally translated as sauce. So it's just called seafood sauce.
Seafood sauce, yes. And you do have a few sauces in your scenes, I think.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah, I do.
That's very cool.
I love sauces.
And with Thai culture, there are also some scenes with dance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So the lam, is that right?
Yes, lam Thai. Do you dance at all?
I don't. I wish that I did. So for me, I actually didn't grow up in Thailand. So I did miss the whole cultural thing. I grew up in Hong Kong, but I have parents from both sides. So I did miss the dance thing, which a lot of Thai girls would be forced to do when they're younger.
Yeah.
But I have been picking up some Thai instruments since coming back.
How nice.
So like lanat. It is also book research for the current book that I'm writing. So very important.
So in the book, you know, Winnie and her family go to Wat Thai temple, and it's very in America. It's very traditional, as Nessa mentioned, for a lot of girls to do Thai dance as they're growing up and they have performances. The thing is, I didn't either because I grew up in a small town in Kansas. And so the closest Wat Thai was in Kansas City, which is maybe 3 hours away. So I didn't have that same experience either, but I did do a little Thai dancing when I got to college. And it was really fun. And I felt incredibly ungraceful. The Thai dance is very graceful. And then look at the people who are so good at it. And like, you know, when I talk about Jeep and Wong, and so it's like their fingers have to go all the way back, and it's just so pretty. But I really was appreciative of the opportunity to do it, even though it made me feel like, oh wow. And I think in the book I talk about a phrase being like a real Thai girl or a good Thai girl, and to me it was always like this epitome of like grace and like, you know, being calm, cool, and collected. And I never felt like that. I felt like a really, you know, loud, awkward American who didn't fit into that stereotype, but it was still like super fun to learn. Costumes are stunning. Costumes are so beautiful.
I think that was probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole book, that what scene, because I've never seen a what depicted in any media actually, and just seeing that I had chills because, you know, so much Thai pride reading it. So thank you for such an amazing scene.
Thank you. I love that scene too, and you're absolutely right. I knew I wanted, you know, to have something at the Wat, and like the Songkran holiday was just perfect for that because you get like the beautiful food fair and like the dancing and the Wat itself. And like, you know, growing up Thai, where all my life I go to different Wats, and a lot of the Thai Americans joke a lot like, oh yeah, when we're kids on summer vacations we just go to hot Wats. They're always hot because it's always so hot in Thailand. And so it's like this running joke that this is something that our parents always made us do. But then when you get older, you really appreciate it.
Yes. Which brings me, that is a good segue to my next question. So the Thai community that you portray in this book is quite vivid. And quite accurately portrayed. Do you remember your first Thai community experience, and how has that inspired the world that the Tech Sisters live in?
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because as I mentioned earlier, I actually didn't grow up in that environment because in Kansas there weren't a lot of Thai people. But since then, my parents moved to St. Louis with a very, very vibrant Thai community. My brother lives in Chicago, a very vibrant Thai community. So a lot of it was just from, and my sister was a teenager in St. Louis in this community. And so a lot of it was just talking to them and hearing their experiences. I did have exposure to it somewhat because these big Thai parties where you have like, 25 families come and get together. There's so much of that. I think my first experience was probably in my early teens, like 12 or 13, and we went up to a party in Kansas City. And again, there's a much bigger Thai community up there than where I was. And so it was very much like that first party scene that I describe in the book, where you have like tons of adults, all the kids kind of gather together, so much food, everybody's asking questions about everybody. So
that normal, have you gained weight or have you lost weight?
Oh my gosh. That question, which is so funny that you said that. I didn't put that in the book, but like that question is so typical. It's like upon seeing somebody, you have to remark on their weight. And then you're either you gain weight or you lost weight. And if it's you gain weight, which is to me what most of the time that question was, you're just like, oh,
it's really? Like before you say, Auntie sawadee ka, have you gained weight?
And you're like, no. So every time I went to Thailand, I've been going every year since I was 6 years old. But all the way through like my childhood and my teen years, it's like every year, oh, have you gained weight? And it's like, actually, I weighed the same as I always weighed the same. But after about 20 years, they did get bored of asking the questions. So my family still does it. My family here, just because, although they usually say, they're very sweet. They're like, oh, have you lost weight? And I'm like, definitely not. But thank you. But yeah, that's a fun question.
And just a continuation of that question, any characters inspired by real people or Thai stereotypes?
Yes. So, this question I get asked a lot, even when it's not with Thai characters. And so my answer has always been that I am inspired by the emotion that a character evokes rather than an actual person. And so in this case, Winnie is inspired by my little sister. She's 12 years younger than me. And she very much has the same feelings that Winnie does, that, oh, I can never be as good as my older sister and my older brother. They've already come first. They've already accomplished everything, and there's no way that I could even catch up. So why should I even try? So that is definitely for my little sister. The dad in the book is inspired by my dad. My dad is really cute, really funny, very loving. But actually some of the conversations that she has with her dad have been inspired by real conversations.
Oh, that's so cute.
So cute. Those conversations were pretty funny. And then when I was writing those scenes, I was visiting St. Louis, and so my sister read out loud that first scene when she's with her dad and they're having the conversation. So she read it out loud to my mom, my stepmom and my dad, and oh my gosh, we were just on the floor laughing so hard because it's kind of like an inside joke in our family. So yeah, so it's really funny. So I mean, other than that, and like the dad is not exactly my dad either, but I think those are the closest inspirations.
I see. Your characters are amazing. I related so much to Winnie as a younger sister, and just there's so many different layers of the family that you created, which brings me to my next question. As family is a very important thing in Thai culture, and I mean a lot of cultures, and it seems to be a very strong theme in your book. What message regarding duty and family would you like your readers, especially younger readers, to pick up from this story, especially when the premise surrounds a very, very conservative type family?
Yeah, and I think that the biggest message I wanted to convey was a lesson that I learned as I was growing up, which is that like a lot of times the most strict rules aren't there just because the parents want to be strict. Like there's usually a really valid and important reason behind it. And at least in my case, it was usually because they had my best interests at heart. And so the strict rules were really a way to try and ensure that I could get to happiness with the least heartbreak possible on the path. And so that's why that important scene at the very end, like I really wanted to get across that like Winnie and her sisters maybe, because in the beginning we can laugh at the mom and, she's ridiculous and so strict. And so it's, it's funny. And in the beginning, maybe they're like, oh, she's just so ridiculous. She's just so ridiculous. But towards the end, I really wanted my readers and the characters in my book to see and understand that these were all coming from a place of love and maybe they didn't go about it the right way. Maybe it wasn't the best way to achieve it, but from their perspective, they were trying to, create the least pain possible for their daughters. So I think that like, it was just, like a really eye-opening thing that I learned as I grew up and became an adult. Because as kids, you're always just like, what are these rules? Like, they're so strict, they're so mean, they're so ridiculous. So, yeah.
Do you react to these rules differently now that you yourself are a parent? And do you enforce these type of tie rules with your kids?
Well, my kids are pretty young. My oldest is 13, and I have an 11-year-old and a 6-year-old. And the 13-year-old is it's a girl, my daughter. So I think she's not quite there yet, but maybe in the next few years these topics will start coming up. I would certainly not enforce a no dating in high school rule because I've been through it. But I would want to, like, as a parent, my goal is just to open the lines of communication so that she wants to talk to me and that if issues come up, we can talk through it. And so from the time that she was young, I've really enforced, like, you can talk to me about anything and I won't be mad if you're coming to me and being like, hey, listen, this is the situation. What should I do? But I just want to be a part of the process. And also in the book, like at one point I talk about how Winnie doesn't feel like she can talk to her mom. And I think that sometimes like a side effect of these rules, when they're very strict or when they're perceived to be very strict, that there's not these open lines of communication between parent and child. And I think that is so utterly important.
That's very cool. I think a lot of Thai kids will benefit from this book because that conversation is normally not tackled, I guess, in a very in a local kind of setting. So I think, with this story, I think it would help generate more conversation, I guess, with Thai families.
I hope so.
Okay, so my next question, so more crafty questions, I guess. Can you describe a little bit about your creative process and your whole writing process? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So this is my 8th published book. I wrote 4 books before that. So I have about 12 books that I've written in my life. And believe it or not, the process is different with every book. And it's not intentional because sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, that process worked really great with that book. I'd like to like duplicate it with this one. And then it just doesn't work out because they're just different. The process with this book was different from all of my others because I actually started working with my editor on it from the very first moment. So when I had the idea for it, I happened to be in the same place as my editor. We were doing a week in New York with some the sales reps and things like that. And we were all staying in like a bunch of authors and a lot of Entangled staff were staying in the same big house. And so it was after midnight and I was like, hey, so I had this idea for a book. And then I just kind of pitched it to her. And 30 seconds later, she was like, okay, I'll buy it. Done. And so it happened like super quickly. I had not written a single word at that point. And so because she was in it from the very beginning, I had her input at a lot of the intermediate stages. So I wrote the first chapter, she read it and gave me her thoughts. Then I wrote 100 pages, and then she read it and gave me her thoughts. Then I had the whole thing. And I've never had that process before. And it was really interesting and really helpful because any problems or issues she saw early on, I could go ahead and correct it and not have written a whole book. And that makes it much harder to revise and fix. And so because we did that, we actually didn't have that many revisions when I finished. And this book has actually been the book where I had the least amount of revisions. So, and it also happened pretty quickly. So the conversation where I sold the book to her happened in October last year. And that's really fast because usually sometimes, a book is finished a year before publication. And this was like, we didn't even sign the contract until a few months before about publication. So I was writing it, I was finishing writing it when the coronavirus pandemic hit. So that was also a really interesting thing that happened. And, I was so anxious about the world, about everything that was going on. And writing the book was the one time where I was taken away from that and that I could, think about something else. So it was actually like pure joy for me to write this book. And I don't think I've ever said that about any other book before. Other books were like much more difficult to write. But for me, it was truly a way for me to escape what was going on in the world and retreat into Winnie's world is really funny. It's really fun. So I enjoyed like retreating into something that was just so lighthearted and didn't have anything heavy and wasn't and like ironically I had just published a book called Malice in February when the coronavirus hit, and that book is about a girl who finds out that a boy 10 years in the future will create a virus that wipes out half the world, and so then she has to figure out if she can kill his innocent life today in order to stop millions in the future. And I didn't know it at the time because I'd written it, 2 years ago. But that, oh my gosh, was such a coincidence that it published right before the pandemic. And well, the pandemic was already happening and, it was already happening in parts of the world, but like it hadn't come to the US yet. But, like that was so close to what was happening in the world that I just so appreciated a kind of story that was just, an escape away from all of that.
I think in the current climate, it had that effect while reading as well. Her voice is just so fun and so lighthearted, as you said, and it was a joy to read.
Oh, thank you so much. I've just said that is yesterday. I just said this to somebody that that's the biggest compliment that I could receive from a reader. So thank you.
Okay, so the next question is, how did you get into publishing as a diverse author, and what do own voices and diverse reads means to you?
Okay, so it means everything to me. I wanted to be an author ever since I was 6 years old. And the reason I know that is because my first grade teacher gave us that assignment, what do you want to be when you grow up? It really stuck with me because in the first grade, I said, I want to be an author when I grow up. And that was such looking back, I'm shocked that I knew that early because I didn't even speak English until I went to school. So even though I was born in the United States, Thai was my first language.
I see.
Yeah, so my parents only spoke to me in Thai, and when I went to preschool, they taught me how to say, can I use the bathroom? So those were the first English words I learned how to say. And So the first few years of my life in school were very, I was very quiet because I didn't feel confident in my language skills. Like I could read and understand, but I felt like I wasn't good at pronouncing the words. I was in Kansas, so people would make fun of me if I said like a word wrong. And so I was very quiet, and I read a lot of books. That's all I did. That was my escape. So I knew I wanted to be an author ever since I was 6, but I think even back then, I knew that, or I thought it was truth, that if I wanted to publish, it would have to be about white characters. And that's because all the books I read, there were never any characters who looked like me. And so that was something that I just kind of grew up believing, like, you know, I want to publish books someday, but it has to be about white characters. And it wasn't until recently, I don't know, We Need Diverse Books was 2014, 2013, sometime around there, when publishers started being much more open and embracing the own voices more. And so how I feel about diverse books is I think it's equally important to have books that really explore a person's culture, but I think it's also really important to have stories where they have other things going on in their lives, because, you know, our race is only an important part of who we are, but it's only a small part of who we are. And so I hate the idea that own voices authors are being, I don't know if they're being told this, but sometimes there is the pressure like, well, you know, you should really only write books or stories where you're talking about race or like talking about culture. I think it's equally important. Like in my science fiction novels, it's not really about culture at all. It just happens to be that my heroine is Asian or half Asian. And I did that when I first started publishing. I did that for my kids because I knew that I never saw any characters in books who looked like me, and I wanted my kids to see themselves reflected in books. And so I think that both types of stories are equally important, where it's, you know, sometimes it's just, you know, a character of color who's having like an epic science fiction adventure, or if it's a story like this one, where I really am able to explore culture much more closely. But I can't tell you, I mean, I'm sure you would understand. It's just phenomenal to me and almost surreal to think that, oh my gosh, like I can publish a book like this, or like I can have a cover of a girl like this on a book. It's just, I cried when I saw this cover. Like I couldn't believe it. They did such an amazing job. And it's just like, when I was a kid, I didn't even dream about it because I didn't think it was possible. You know? Yeah. And she's so beautiful, and like having a beautiful Thai girl on a cover is just, it means everything to me. And I want so badly to go back in time and show this to myself when I was a little girl, because and I think it was so damaging because not ever having that representation. And for me to grow up in Kansas, I felt ugly. I felt like I was an alien. I felt like the way that I looked was just not something that was accepted and embraced. And if I had been able to see like, oh wow, like that's not always going to be the perception of a Thai American or an Asian American. It's not always going to be the case that, like, you know, you have to fill up these awful secondary stereotypical roles, like, you know, in the movies that you have back in like the 80s and 90s, like when you rewatch them, they do not stand up well. But, you know, just to see that, like, wow, like this kind of character can be the heroine of her own story too. It's so important to me as an author, and it's so important to when I think about like the next generation of kids growing up and being able to see stories like this. and my own children.
That's incredible.
A little long-winded answer, but
No,
I'm passionate about
not at all. I'm not at all. Just to hear you explain that, like I said just now. So I said "khonlup," which means goosebumps in Thai. Oh, sorry, no, in English. And you said exactly what I was feeling in terms of seeing the whole media sphere change, seeing people become more accepting of different voices, different faces. It's a great thing. And I think as someone who wants to be a creator in this industry as well, just to see that, oh, someone's done it, someone's made it, you have no idea how much it means to someone who is living in Asia as well and who wants to write a book for this market.
So, and I just want to give props to my editor and the art director, Liz Peltier and Brie Archer, because they were constantly texting me like, is this the right Asian girl? Does she look like a Thai girl as opposed to like a Korean or Japanese or Chinese? And I loved that, because so much of the time people kind of just group all Asians together as like, oh, they're interchangeable, and they're not. And I was like, that looks so much like a Thai girl. And then it was also like, you know, text messages like, oh, is the skin tone right? Like, we want to make sure that the skin tone is right, and, you know, giving me like several different options. And I was so grateful to them for caring so much about making sure that I felt that this was like a good representation of a Thai girl, not just some random Asian girl who was on there. But, that meant so much to me.
That's great. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question. Do you identify as a third culture kid, or have you ever faced the issue of being Thai, but being told that you are not Thai enough?
Yes.
And how do you deal with this personally, as a parent or as a writer?
All my life. All my life, I have felt like I wasn't Thai enough and I wasn't American enough. So I didn't fit in America because, especially in Kansas, everyone thought I was, you know, a total freak. Didn't fit in there. But then when I went to Thailand, like I told you, I went every year, and I spent a lot of time there. You know, I often would spend like the whole summer there, and I don't look like a typical Thai girl either. I'm too tall, too broad-shouldered, too big. My hair is too frizzy. And so being in Thailand, I didn't fit in there, and, you know, and it's a hard place to be, to not feel like you belong anywhere. And in my book, Girl on the Verge, I actually talk about these issues much more head on, because that book is about a Thai American girl who feels like she fits in to neither world, and she's struggling to find her identity. And it's about what happens to her when a stalker comes and tries to steal her identity. So it's a thriller. But and so that's something that I've grown up feeling and believing. And as a parent, like, I didn't want my children to feel that way. And they have their own sets of difficulties that I can't understand, because they're half Thai and half Caucasian. And I think that, you know, for them, it's often like with my daughter, people are like, oh my gosh, like, that's your mom? They think she's adopted, or when she was a baby, when we would go out, everyone thought I was the nanny. Oh, in Thailand, when I'm with them in Thailand, they think I'm the nanny too. So it's like, that's something that we've always had to deal with. And I think as they grow older, they will have to deal with it more. But I've tried to be very cognizant of that and tried to prepare it to them. So, you know, it's really important for me, for them to be exposed to Thai culture, for them to really understand and celebrate this wonderful culture that they come from. And ever since they've been born, they go to Thailand every year as well. Except for this year. So sad.
Sending this Thai vibe and the hot weather to you.
Yeah, we're so sad. But yeah, and so I've been trying to, be aware of it with them, talk about these issues with them.
Do you speak Thai at home?
We do. So my cousin lives with me. She actually, so my mom passed away when I was 5, and so she helped to raise me, and then and now she's helping to raise my kids. So she speaks Thai to them every day. So they're a lot like me when I was a kid. They understand Thai really well. They don't speak very well. And the only reason that I was able to get my speaking language back was in college. I made a big effort, and I watched a lot of Thai lakon.
Yes.
So I spent a summer in Thailand during college, and I had an internship. But while I wasn't working, all I did was watch Thai soap operas. That's all I did. Hours and hours and hours and hours, and it really helped me with my Thai. Like it really helped me get the fluency back. Yes. But even now, like if I go to Thailand after a couple weeks, my Thai will be much better than it is here, because it's practice. But,
fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's most of the questions that I wanted to ask.
Can't touch a keyboard without immense debilitating pain. And so I've written my last 8 books on my cell phone.